Yes, thanks, Patrick. Let's now bring in the CEO of the Media Council of Kenya, Aaron Mwangi, and Leo Boruet, Director in charge of multimedia at the Communications Authority of Kenya. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Bwana Director.
Thank you.
What influenced the crafting of this podcast code, and did you involve all the necessary stakeholders?
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Maybe just to step back, I think this process actually has taken quite a while. This process began in April 2015, and we came up with a draft, and we shared it with the stakeholders. And the example of stakeholders involved we had people from the broadcasters themselves, we had children organizations, we had consumer organizations, we had church organizations, we had even viewers. There's actually an association of viewers and listeners, and consumer organizations. So the process actually was consultative because we received the inputs, and based on the new constitution, we have actually even uploaded that analysis. So you were able to see the analysis of the inputs, and then our analysis, and then the recommendations. And the recommendation is what has informed this code. So what I want to say is, I think the key thing really, there are several key things. The first thing is our children. Our children need to be protected, and that's why we are talking about the watershed period. The other key thing is the issue of local content, which we have actually talked about 40% in 1 year, 60% in 4 years, and that was also based on an input by broadcasters, because initially we wanted it sooner, but because of the investment involved, we were able to. The other thing is inclusiveness, and I'm happy at KTN you've got the signed language insert. This is a constitutional requirement that we need to be inclusive in our broadcasting programs. And the one that has a lot of publicity now, the one of the churches, I think is informed by what has been going on. And if you read that clause, actually, it doesn't refuse preaching, because what the clause says is you don't tell somebody to convert by disparaging the other religion. So, because we know preaching is about appeal, it's about telling others the good things about your religion and the positive aspect of your religion. So that one is still allowed. And there was an example which we actually said we will remove, because it was just talking of financial gain and what do we call, and the issue of forcing people. But the issue is taking advantage of susceptible audience. So that's very important for us.
So I have the code here.
Yes.
Broadcasters shall ensure that religious programs do not improperly exploit any susceptibilities of the audience for such program, e.g. religious personnel should not misuse religion to exploit audiences.
Yes.
This is what is said to target that so-called seed money gospel. How do you put that aside? That will affect a lot of people, a lot of televangelists. How do you identify what is exploiting?
Exploiting means I think Mandela said, when you talk to the person in the religion, you talk to the art, and the person is very susceptible to. So what we want is it will be contextual. It will be a contextual case, so that we will be looking at the context and be able to assess. And that's why we agreed to remove that example. Actually, if you look at our analysis in our website, that example has been removed. So because we realize you can also exploit people, not necessarily financially. That's just one element. So we've made it more wider, so that it can cover even other instances of exploitation.
Right. Mr. CEO, what is the view of the Media Council of Kenya about this code?
I think time is up for media to be regulated, because for a number of years media has operated in Kenya without regulation, and for the first time this document is going to be attached to the licensing, so that basically you have to meet some of the provision or all the provisions in that programming code. Because when we talk about reforms of institutions in Kenya, media should not be an exemption to this reform, and therefore for me it's a welcome. Number two, we have many issues that people have been complaining about. Media being a cultural institution, to safeguard values and socialize people and children, it must be guarded by some guidelines like this one that have been produced. So for the first time, we see the government or CA taking the role of media as a cultural institution more seriously by setting standards that media should be able to operate under. Number three, we see overlaps between the code of conduct for the Media Council of Kenya and some provisions in the programming code, and these have been addressed through an MOU that we have signed with the CA, so that there is cross-referencing of cases that touch on the code of conduct and also touch on the programming code can be dealt with by the two institutions.
The work of regulating the media is your work, the Media Council of Kenya. Isn't the Communications Authority of Kenya infringing on that function of yours?
There are two differences here. Number one is that the code of conduct for the practice of journalists or journalism in Kenya specifically addresses the issues of the conduct and behavior, professional conduct and behavior of journalists, while the programming code is specifically addressing the conduct and behavior of the media houses, right? Sometimes there could be some conflict, so that when the code of conduct is breached by a journalist, it may also touch on the broadcaster. So when this kind of conflict arises, then we are able to resolve them amicably through the MOU. So the programming code is purely behavior and conduct of broadcasters, but the ethical principles of journalism purely deals with the professional conduct and behavior of journalists. And where there are overlaps and conflict, then that's why we're able to deal with it here.
All right, we have more questions for you. We take a quick break right here on KTN Weekend Prime. We shall be back. Stay with us. Welcome back to KTN Weekend Prime. If you're just joining us, we have in studio Haron Mwangi, CEO of the Media Council of Kenya, and Leo Borwet, Director in charge of multimedia at the Communications Authority of Kenya. Mr. Director, if I can come to looking at this code, let me just read. Advertisements shall not feature visually or orally persons regularly presenting news. All forms of advertising for cigarettes, cigars shall be prohibited. Advertisements shall not directly encourage minors to persuade their parents or others to purchase. Advertisements should not unfairly attack or discredit other advertisers. Did you consider the implication of these regulations for the commercial interests of the media houses?
Okay, first of all, we recognize that most of these stations are funded by advert money, and advertisement is really the main source of revenue. But what we also realized is experience of television also. We also need to take into account the experience of the consumer. And there's a balance now. The consumer wants to watch uninterrupted, but still, but you see, the station needs to run, so you need to get some adverts.
Exactly.
If the parties are the same power of negotiation, we could actually leave it for market forces. And we have actually benchmarked with other countries. Because of that, we have intervened so that we are able to balance so that the consumer gets the experience while the advertisement is still available for the broadcaster. If you look at the news items for most of the stations now, sometimes they run up to 50 minutes, and you'll see maybe commercials about 25 minutes. So we saw that really this is disadvantaging the consumer. And we benchmarked, like now we looked at countries like Australia, like UK, they are doing 6 minutes per 30 minutes. We also discussed with experts, Association of Practitioners.
But are the markets the same, Mr. Director? Kenya and Australia, are the markets the same?
Okay, they are the same. We knew they are not the same, and that's why we actually consulted also the Association of Practitioners of Advertising, and really they are the ones really who endorsed this proposal. And we also thought we should not stop there, and that's why we put this thing in public consultation.
Right.
But we never got any other alternative proposal because we are flexible. We just put the principle is what we brought in, and then we got some figures based on benchmark purposes, and this figure was to fluctuate depending on the inputs, but there was no alternative input from the market.
Right.
Yeah, and maybe you also need to remember
Very
that
quickly, because of time.
now there's a lot of channels coming, and there's also some transformation in terms of advertising market, such that it's more of programming instead of channel. So that's also another input maybe.
Right. Mr. CEO, very quickly, from where you stand as a council, has the media failed to regulate itself? Or have you failed as a media council to warrant intervention from the government?
I'm not sure that this is an intervention by the government. This is a regulation of the media is a global practice. It's a global practice where there is successful media self-regulation. Still, you find the government coming in to regulate the function and operation of the media. So I'm not sure that it would be categorically right to say that media has failed to regulate itself, although there are some challenges that media is facing in terms of self-regulation. The council has no commission now because of the matter in court, and therefore there are those gaps that we are addressing. But let me come to what my brother has just mentioned, that the concern of limiting the advert time to 7 minutes per block of that minutes is not very good for commercial broadcasters in Kenya. And in my own view, we would have limited this to public funded broadcaster like ABC, because that's basically most of the practice globally, as opposed to imposing this time to the commercial and private commercial broadcasters. Number two, it would have been wise to specifically say that this is limited to news hour, because that's where the contention is. And he has said correctly that in 55 minutes, out of 55 minutes, 25 is just advert. So basically that could have been more specific, that they're limiting this to news hour time as opposed to any other program.
Right, last question.
Yes.
Mr. CEO, don't you think these regulations are limiting or are infringing on Kenyans' freedom of worship?
I'm not sure, because there are many people who want to complain about the behavior and conduct of preachers, right? But they have no room,
Yes.
and there was no basis of complaint.
Right.
And therefore now they have the basis. And therefore Kenyans now are free to come up and say, we are facing this kind of a challenge with the preachers. Initially they could not have been able to do that.
Yes.
And the mechanism have been put in place for those people who feel that they are not satisfied with the preachers.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. So,
Director,
Director, last question for
Yes.
you. What punishment will be meted out to those in contravention of these laws?
Okay, the laws really spell out
Very
that
quickly, sir.
in case of any breach, we use what is in the Act. The Act already provides for either 1 million or 3 years, but we also have the option of a penalty, which is from 500,000 to 0.2% of the gross revenue. But of course, if you subsequent breach, then
Right.
you can actually withdraw leave the business for others. Maybe if this is the last time I'm talking, I could. Yeah,
Just 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah, I think what I want to say also, what you are doing as CA is part of the exercise. But I think as parents, we have a big role,
Right.
especially broadcasters also, we have a big role. We've given them 6 months. We are sensitive to, because we know it's involves some cash. And we are very consultative in this thing.
All right.
And
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Leo
thank you.
Boru, Director in charge of Multimedia at the Communications Authority of Kenya, and the CEO of the Media Council of Kenya, Aaron Mwangi. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing with us.